The morning sun cast long shadows across the Navy SEAL training compound in Coronado, California. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his tactical vest and checked his watch. Another grueling day of advanced combat training lay ahead, but something felt different in the air. The usual pre-dawn chatter among the trainees was subdued, almost tense. Rodriguez had been a SEAL for 8 years, earning his reputation through 3 deployments in Afghanistan and countless hours of specialized training. At 32, he was considered one of the most experienced non-commissioned officers in his unit. His dark eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had seen combat and lived to tell about it, though he rarely spoke of those experiences outside official debriefings. The training facility buzzed with activity as over 200 naval personnel prepared for what was supposed to be a routine multi-unit exercise. Representatives from various Navy divisions had gathered for this joint training operation, including some who had never worked directly with SEALs before. The exercise was designed to test communication, coordination, and decision-making under pressure across different military specialties. Rodriguez noticed her immediately when she walked into the briefing room. Petty Officer Second Class Sarah Chen moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to proving herself in a male-dominated environment. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her uniform was pressed to perfection. What caught his attention was not her appearance, but the way several other personnel watched her enter. Some gazes held curiosity, others skepticism, and a few carried something more troubling. Chen was one of only 12 women participating in the exercise, and the only one assigned to the high-intensity combat simulation scenarios that the SEALs would be running. She had graduated at the top of her class from Navy Technical School and had consistently exceeded performance standards in her 2 years of service. Her specialty in electronic warfare and communications made her a valuable asset, but some of the older, more traditional sailors questioned whether women belonged in combat-adjacent roles. The briefing officer, Lieutenant Commander James Harrison, stood at the front of the room with a stack of folders containing the day's operational parameters. Harrison was known for running challenging exercises that pushed personnel to their limits. He believed that training should be as close to real combat conditions as possible, minus the actual bullets flying overhead. Today's exercise will simulate a hostage rescue operation in an urban environment, Harrison announced, his voice carrying across the silent room. Teams will be required to breach, clear, and secure multiple buildings while maintaining communication protocols and minimizing civilian casualties represented by mannequins. Rodriguez studied the tactical maps being distributed. The exercise area consisted of a mock village constructed specifically for training purposes, complete with multi-story buildings, narrow alleys, and various obstacles designed to replicate real-world urban combat scenarios. It was the kind of environment where split-second decisions could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Petty Officer Chen will be embedded with SEAL Team Delta as their communications specialist, Harrison continued. Her role will be to maintain contact with command and coordinate with other units during the operation. Rodriguez saw several team members exchange glances. It was not unusual for specialists from other divisions to work with SEALs during joint exercises, but the integration was not always smooth. The SEAL teams operated with a level of intensity and precision that could be overwhelming for personnel not accustomed to their methods. Team Delta's leader, Chief Petty Officer Mike Thompson, was a 15-year veteran with a reputation for demanding excellence from everyone under his command. Thompson stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and had the build of someone who spent hours in the gym when not training for operations. His scarred hands told the story of countless hours handling weapons and equipment in conditions ranging from scorching desert heat to freezing mountain cold. Chen, you'll be staying close to Rodriguez during the exercise, Thompson instructed after the briefing ended. He'll make sure you understand our procedures and keep you positioned where you can do your job effectively. Rodriguez nodded, understanding the responsibility being placed on him. Integrating an outsider into a SEAL operation, even a training exercise, required careful attention to ensure both mission success and personnel safety. Chen would need to adapt quickly to their pace and communication style. As the teams prepared their equipment, Rodriguez approached Chen to discuss their operational procedures. She was checking her communication equipment with the methodical precision of someone who understood that technical failures could compromise entire missions. Have you worked with SEAL teams before? Rodriguez asked, keeping his tone professional but not unfriendly. Not directly, Chen replied, not looking up from her equipment check. But, I've studied your operational procedures and communication protocols. I know you work faster and with less chatter than most units. Rodriguez appreciated her direct answer. Many personnel try to oversell their qualifications when working with SEALs for the first time. Chen's honesty about her limited experience suggested she understood the importance of accurate self-assessment in high-stakes situations. The key is staying calm and focused, Rodriguez explained. When things get intense during the exercise, remember that everyone on the team is counting on clear communications. If you need clarification on anything, ask immediately. Don't wait and hope you figure it out. Chen nodded, securing her equipment and adjusting her tactical gear. I understand. My job is to make sure information flows accurately and quickly between you and command. The morning briefing concluded with final equipment checks and review of safety protocols. Despite being a training exercise, the scenarios would involve live ammunition in controlled circumstances, explosive charges for breaching operations, and complex tactical movements that carried inherent risks even under carefully supervised conditions. Rodriguez watched Chen interact with other team members during the preparation phase. She was professional and competent, but he could sense the underlying tension from some of the other personnel. Not everyone was comfortable with the increasing integration of women into combat-adjacent roles, and exercises like this often became proving grounds for broader debates about military policy. Petty Officer Jake Morrison, a communications specialist from another unit, made several comments that Rodriguez found inappropriate. Morrison had been vocal about his opposition to women in combat roles, often citing physical strength requirements and unit cohesion concerns. His presence during the exercise seemed designed to create tension rather than support the training objectives. I just hope she can keep up when things get real, Morrison commented loudly enough for Chen to hear while the teams conducted final preparations. SEALs don't have time to babysit during operations. Rodriguez felt his jaw tighten at the comment, but Chen's response surprised him. Instead of rising to the bait, she simply continued her equipment preparation with focused professionalism. Her ability to ignore the provocation demonstrated the kind of mental toughness that Rodriguez respected in any team member, regardless of gender. Chief Thompson gathered Team Delta for their final briefing before the exercise began. The team consisted of 6 SEALs plus Chen as their attached communications specialist. Each member had specific roles and responsibilities that would need to be executed with precision during the simulated hostage rescue operation. Remember, this exercise is being observed by command personnel who are evaluating our readiness for deployment, Thompson emphasized. Every decision you make reflects on this team and this unit. Execute your assignments professionally and support your teammates. Rodriguez checked his weapon and communication equipment one final time. The exercise would last approximately 4 hours and include multiple scenarios designed to test different aspects of their training. Success would be measured not just on mission completion, but on adherence to protocols, team coordination, and individual performance under pressure. As the teams moved toward the training area, Rodriguez noticed Chen walking with determined focus. Whatever doubts others might have about her presence, she was clearly committed to proving herself through performance rather than arguments. Rodriguez respected that approach and made a mental note to ensure she had every opportunity to succeed. The mock village stretched out before them, its realistic construction creating an environment that closely resembled actual urban combat zones. Buildings showed simulated battle damage, debris-cluttered streets, and carefully positioned obstacles would force the teams to adapt their movements and tactics throughout the exercise. Lieutenant Commander Harrison's voice crackled through their communication systems as the teams took their starting positions. Exercise begins in 60 seconds. All units confirm ready status. Rodriguez felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied the start of tactical operations. Even in training, his body and mind shifted into the heightened state of awareness that had kept him alive through real combat missions. Beside him, Chen checked her communication equipment one last time and adjusted her position to maintain visual contact with the team. Delta Team ready, Thompson reported into his radio. The countdown began, and Rodriguez focused on the mission ahead. In a few seconds, they would begin an exercise that was designed to test their limits and push them beyond their comfort zones. What none of them knew was that before the day ended, this routine training exercise would spiral into something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about duty, honor, and standing up for what was right. The whistle blew, marking the beginning of what would become one of the most controversial training exercises in recent Navy history. As Team Delta moved toward their first objective, Rodriguez had no idea that he was about to witness events that would force him to choose between following orders and following his conscience. The morning sun climbed higher as the teams advanced into the mock village, each member focused on their assigned roles and objectives. Chen maintained her position near Rodriguez, her communication equipment functioning perfectly as she coordinated with command and other units. The exercise was proceeding according to plan, but Rodriguez could not shake the feeling that something was building beneath the surface of this supposedly routine training operation. What happened next would test not just their tactical skills, but their character as well. The first phase of the exercise proceeded exactly as planned. Team Delta moved through the mock village with precision, clearing buildings and neutralizing simulated threats while Chen maintained flawless communication with command. Rodriguez watched her work with growing respect as she adapted quickly to the intense pace of SEAL operations, providing clear and timely updates that kept the entire mission coordinated. 2 hours into the exercise, the teams had successfully completed 3 of their 5 assigned objectives. Chen had proven herself capable of keeping up with the demanding physical requirements while maintaining her technical responsibilities. Her communication reports were crisp and accurate, and she had successfully coordinated complex tactical movements between multiple units without a single error. Rodriguez noticed that even some of the skeptical team members were beginning to acknowledge Chen's competence. Her professional performance was speaking louder than any arguments about women in combat roles. She moved with confidence through the simulated urban environment, staying in position and following tactical protocols as if she had been training with SEALs for years. During a brief rest period between objectives, Chief Thompson approached Rodriguez with what appeared to be new instructions from Lieutenant Commander Harrison. Thompson's expression was serious, and Rodriguez could sense that something about the exercise parameters had changed. "Command wants us to modify the next scenario," Thompson explained quietly. "They're implementing what they're calling a stress test to see how personnel perform under extreme psychological pressure in addition to physical demands." Rodriguez frowned at the vague description. Stress testing was not unusual in SEAL training, but the timing and nature of this modification seemed odd. "What kind of stress test?" "They want us to simulate capture and interrogation scenarios," Thompson continued. "Some team members will play the role of hostile forces, and others will experience simulated capture situations to test their resistance training and psychological resilience." The explanation made Rodriguez uncomfortable, though he could not immediately articulate why. Capture resistance training was indeed a legitimate part of military preparation, but something about the timing and context felt wrong. Chen was performing exceptionally well, and introducing a major change to the exercise parameters seemed unnecessary and potentially disruptive. "Who's been designated for the capture scenarios?" Rodriguez asked. Thompson hesitated before answering. "Command specifically requested that Chen be included in the simulation. They want to evaluate how female personnel handle interrogation pressure compared to their male counterparts." Rodriguez felt alarm bells going off in his mind. The request sounded more like an attempt to create a situation designed to make Chen fail rather than a legitimate training exercise. The timing was particularly suspect, coming after Chen had demonstrated her competence in the standard tactical scenarios. "Chief, with respect, that doesn't sound like standard protocol," Rodriguez said carefully. "Capture resistance training is usually conducted separately from tactical exercises, with specific preparation and safety measures in place." Thompson nodded, his expression indicating that he shared Rodriguez's concerns. "I had the same thoughts, but the orders come directly from command. Apparently, some observers want to see how she handles additional pressure." Rodriguez understood the subtext. Some of the personnel who had been skeptical about Chen's participation were now looking for ways to create situations where she might struggle or fail. The fact that she had performed well in the standard scenarios seemed to have prompted them to escalate their testing rather than acknowledge her competence. As Team Delta prepared for the next phase of the exercise, Rodriguez noticed changes in the behavior of some personnel from other units. Petty Officer Morrison and several others who had expressed doubts about women in combat roles were now positioned as observers rather than participants, suggesting they had been given specific roles in whatever was about to unfold. Chen was checking her equipment when Rodriguez approached her to discuss the upcoming scenario modification. He wanted to prepare her for what might be coming without alarming her or undermining command authority. The next phase is going to include some different elements, Rodriguez explained diplomatically. They're adding psychological pressure testing to the tactical scenarios. Just remember your training and stay focused on your primary responsibilities. Chen looked up from her equipment with a questioning expression. What kind of psychological pressure testing? Rodriguez struggled with how much to reveal without overstepping his authority. Simulated capture and interrogation scenarios. It's supposed to test resistance training, but I want you to know that this wasn't part of the original exercise parameters. Chen's expression grew more serious as she processed this information. Are you saying they're changing the exercise specifically because of my participation? Rodriguez appreciated her directness, but he also recognized the difficult position he was in. Directly contradicting command decisions could result in disciplinary action, but failing to prepare a team member for what might be coming could compromise both her safety and the mission integrity. I'm saying that you should be prepared for scenarios that might be designed to push you beyond normal training parameters, Rodriguez replied carefully. Remember that this is still a training exercise with safety protocols in place, but stay alert and don't hesitate to call out anything that seems inappropriate or dangerous. Chen nodded, her jaw setting with determination. I understand. I've handled resistance training before, and I'm not going to let anyone force me to quit because they don't think I belong here. Rodriguez admired her resolve, but he was increasingly concerned about what command had planned. The modification of exercise parameters in the middle of training operations was highly unusual, and the specific targeting of Chen suggested motivations that went beyond legitimate training objectives. Lieutenant Commander Harrison's voice crackled through their communication systems with new instructions. All units, prepare for Phase 4 implementation. Team Delta will proceed to Building 7 for scenario execution. Designated personnel will implement capture simulation protocols upon arrival. As Team Delta moved toward Building 7, Rodriguez noticed that the observer personnel were positioning themselves with equipment that included video cameras. The presence of recording equipment suggested that whatever was about to happen was being documented, which could be either a positive safety measure or evidence that someone wanted a record of Chen's performance under extreme pressure. Building 7 was a two-story structure designed to simulate an urban apartment complex. Its interior consisted of narrow hallways, multiple rooms, and stairwells that created numerous opportunities for tactical complications. The building had been used for countless training exercises, but Rodriguez had never seen it set up with the kind of equipment now visible through the windows. Chief Thompson received additional instructions through his earpiece as the team approached the building. His expression grew increasingly uncomfortable as he listened to whatever orders he was receiving from command. Delta Team, new parameters for this scenario, Thompson announced reluctantly. Chen will be designated as a high-value target requiring extraction. Other team members will simulate hostile forces attempting to prevent the extraction through interrogation and intimidation techniques. Rodriguez felt his stomach drop as he realized what was being proposed. The exercise was being structured to place Chen in a vulnerable position where other personnel would be authorized to use interrogation and intimidation techniques against her. Under the guise of training, they were creating a scenario where she could be subjected to treatment that would be completely inappropriate under normal circumstances. Chief, what are the specific safety protocols for this scenario? Rodriguez asked, trying to keep his voice professional despite his growing anger. Thompson hesitated again before responding. Command emphasizes that all techniques must remain within acceptable training parameters, but they want realistic psychological pressure to test resistance training effectiveness. The vague language about acceptable training parameters and realistic psychological pressure provided far too much room for interpretation. Rodriguez realized that Chen was being set up for a situation where she could be subjected to harassment and abuse that would be justified as legitimate training. Chen seemed to understand the implications as well. Her expression had grown cold and determined, but Rodriguez could see the tension in her posture as she processed what was being proposed. "I'm ready to proceed with whatever training scenarios command has authorized," Chen stated clearly, looking directly at the observer personnel who were positioning themselves around the building. Rodriguez made a decision that would change the course of his military career. He could not stand by and watch a fellow service member be subjected to what appeared to be sanctioned harassment disguised as training. His oath as a Navy SEAL included protecting those who could not protect themselves, and Chen was being placed in a situation where the system itself was being used against her. "Chief, I request permission to observe the scenario execution to ensure compliance with safety protocols," Rodriguez stated formally, using language that would be difficult for Thompson to refuse without appearing to sanction unsafe training procedures. Thompson nodded gratefully, recognizing that Rodriguez was providing him with support in a situation that was making everyone uncomfortable. "Permission granted. You'll maintain observer status and report any safety concerns immediately." As the team prepared to enter Building 7, Rodriguez positioned himself where he could monitor everything that happened during the scenario. He had his own recording equipment ready, though he kept it concealed to avoid drawing attention from the command observers who seemed focused on documenting Chen's response to whatever they had planned. Chen took her assigned position inside the building while other personnel prepared to implement the capture simulation. Rodriguez watched through windows and maintained radio contact, ready to intervene if the scenario crossed the line from training into abuse. What happened next would test not just Chen's resistance training, but Rodriguez's commitment to his principles and his willingness to stand up against a system that seemed designed to break down anyone who challenged its traditional boundaries. The exercise was about to reveal whether the Navy's commitment to honor and integrity extended to protecting all service members, or whether some people were considered acceptable casualties in the fight to maintain established hierarchies and attitudes. As Rodriguez watched Chen prepare for what was clearly going to be an ordeal designed to humiliate rather than train her, he made a silent promise that he would not let her face it alone. Whatever consequences his actions might bring, he would not stand by and watch injustice masquerade as military training. The next few hours would determine whether the Navy's values were more than just words on a wall. Inside Building 7, the scenario began with what appeared to be standard capture simulation procedures. Chen was positioned in a room designed to simulate a detention facility while personnel from other units took on the roles of interrogators. Rodriguez monitored the situation through his concealed position, maintaining radio contact and recording everything that transpired. Initially, the exercise followed recognizable patterns from legitimate resistance training. Chen was asked standard interrogation questions about her unit, mission objectives, and command structure. She responded according to established protocols, providing only name, rank, and service number while maintaining composure under pressure. Rodriguez noticed that the interrogation team included Morrison and 3 other personnel who had been vocal about their opposition to women in combat roles. Their presence in this scenario was clearly not coincidental, and Rodriguez grew increasingly vigilant as he observed their behavior and demeanor. After 30 minutes of standard interrogation procedures, Rodriguez heard Lieutenant Commander Harrison's voice through the communication system authorizing enhanced pressure techniques for the scenario. The vague authorization made Rodriguez's blood run cold, as he realized that command was deliberately creating ambiguity that could be used to justify increasingly inappropriate behavior. Morrison took the lead in implementing these enhanced techniques, beginning with verbal intimidation that quickly escalated beyond anything Rodriguez had seen in legitimate resistance training. The language became personal and gender-specific, focusing on Chen's physical appearance and making inappropriate comments about her presence in military service. "Maybe if you can't handle military questioning, you should consider a different career path," Morrison sneered, moving closer to Chen's position in a way designed to intimidate through physical proximity and implied threat. Chen maintained her composure admirably, continuing to respond according to established protocols while refusing to be provoked by the inappropriate behavior. Her professionalism under pressure was remarkable, but Rodriguez could see the strain beginning to show as the verbal abuse continued and escalated. Rodriguez activated his recording equipment and began documenting everything he observed. The scenario had clearly moved beyond legitimate training and into territory that violated military standards for professional conduct and appropriate treatment of personnel during training exercises. Another interrogator joined Morrison in making increasingly inappropriate comments about Chen's gender, her physical capabilities, and her right to serve in military capacities. The language became explicitly sexual in nature, with suggestions that her presence was a distraction and that she was only in the military to seek attention from male personnel. Chen's responses remained professional, but Rodriguez could see that the psychological pressure was intensifying beyond anything that could be justified as legitimate training. The interrogators were working systematically to break down her confidence and dignity through personal attacks that had nothing to do with resistance training objectives. Rodriguez spoke quietly into his radio, requesting clarification from Chief Thompson about the acceptable parameters for the scenario. Thompson's response indicated that he was receiving conflicting guidance from command and was as uncomfortable with the situation as Rodriguez. Rodriguez, continue monitoring and document everything, Thompson instructed quietly. I'm trying to get clearer guidance on scenario limitations from Lieutenant Commander Harrison. Rodriguez realized that Thompson was also concerned about what was happening but was struggling with how to address the situation without directly contradicting orders from superior officers. The institutional pressure to avoid challenging command decisions was creating a situation where everyone could see that things were going wrong, but no one felt empowered to stop it. The verbal abuse continued to escalate as Morrison and his team pushed beyond any reasonable interpretation of training scenarios. They began making threats about Chen's military career, suggesting that her failure to cooperate with their interrogation would result in negative performance evaluations and recommendations that she be removed from military service. Chen's response was a textbook example of resistance training excellence. She maintained her dignity and composure while providing no information beyond what was required, refusing to be provoked into emotional reactions that could be used to justify further abuse. Rodriguez watched with growing admiration for Chen's strength and growing anger at the behavior of the interrogation team. What he was witnessing was not training, it was systematic harassment and abuse being conducted under the cover of military authority. Morrison escalated further, making physical contact that was clearly inappropriate for any training scenario. He placed his hands on Chen's shoulders in a way that was intended to be intimidating and invasive, while making comments about her physical vulnerability and suggesting that real enemies would treat her much worse. Rodriguez had seen enough. The scenario had crossed every line of appropriate training behavior and was now clearly constituting assault under military regulations. He made the decision that would define the rest of his military career and possibly his entire life. That's enough, Rodriguez announced clearly, stepping into the room where the scenario was taking place. This exercise is terminated. Morrison spun around, his face flushed with anger at the interruption. You don't have authority to terminate command-authorized training scenarios, Rodriguez. Rodriguez moved into a position where he could protect Chen while facing down Morrison and the other interrogators. I have authority to stop inappropriate conduct that violates military regulations and basic human dignity. The room went silent as the confrontation escalated. Chen remained in her position, but Rodriguez could see relief in her eyes at his intervention. The other personnel involved in the scenario looked uncertain about how to proceed now that a senior SEAL had challenged their authority. Rodriguez activated his radio and spoke directly to Chief Thompson. Chief, I am formally reporting inappropriate conduct during the training scenario in Building 7. The behavior I have observed constitutes harassment and assault, and I am documenting everything for official review. Thompson's voice came back immediately, with Lieutenant Commander Harrison clearly audible in the background demanding to know what was happening. Rodriguez, return to your observer position and allow the exercise to continue according to command parameters. Rodriguez looked directly into the camera equipment that Morrison's team had been using to record Chen's responses to their abuse. Negative, Chief. I will not observe or participate in activities that violate military regulations regarding appropriate treatment of personnel during training exercises. Morrison moved aggressively toward Rodriguez, clearly intending to intimidate him into backing down. You're interfering with authorized training operations, Rodriguez. This is insubordination and you'll face disciplinary action. Rodriguez stood his ground, his training and combat experience making him more than capable of handling Morrison's attempted intimidation. "What you're doing here is not training, Morrison. It's abuse, and I won't stand by and watch it happen to anyone under my protection." Chen finally spoke, her voice steady despite the ordeal she had endured. "I can handle whatever training scenarios command has authorized. I don't need protection from appropriate military training." Rodriguez appreciated Chen's strength and her desire to handle the situation herself, but he also recognized that she was in an impossible position. If she complained about the treatment she was receiving, she would be accused of being unable to handle military training. If she endured it without complaint, the abuse would continue and potentially escalate. "This isn't about what you can handle," Rodriguez replied to Chen. "This is about what should be happening in a professional military training environment. What I've observed here violates every standard of appropriate conduct." Lieutenant Commander Harrison's voice crackled through the radio system, demanding that all personnel return to their assigned positions and continue with the exercise as planned. His tone made it clear that he considered Rodriguez's intervention to be insubordination that would result in disciplinary action. Rodriguez made the decision that would change everything. He removed his radio headset and spoke directly to everyone present in the room. "I am formally refusing to participate in or observe activities that I believe violate military regulations and basic standards of human dignity. My refusal is based on my oath to uphold the values of the United States Navy." Morrison's face contorted with rage as he realized that Rodriguez was not going to be intimidated or forced to back down. "You're throwing away your career for someone who doesn't even belong here in the first place." Rodriguez felt a cold calm settle over him as he faced down Morrison and the institutional pressure that was being brought to bear. "I'm upholding my oath and protecting a fellow service member from abuse. If that ends my career, then this organization isn't worth serving." Chen stood up from her position, her dignity intact despite everything she had endured. "I appreciate your support, Rodriguez, but I need to make my own decisions about how to handle this situation." Rodriguez nodded respectfully. "You have every right to make your own decisions. But I also have the right and responsibility to report what I've observed and to refuse to participate in activities that violate military standards." The standoff continued for several minutes as personnel from outside the building arrived to assess the situation. Chief Thompson entered the room looking grim, followed by Lieutenant Commander Harrison and several other command personnel. Harrison's expression made it clear that he viewed Rodriguez's actions as a serious breach of military discipline that would require immediate corrective action. "Petty Officer Rodriguez, you are ordered to report for disciplinary review immediately. Your interference with authorized training operations constitutes insubordination." Rodriguez looked around the room at all the personnel present, making sure his words were clearly heard and understood. "Sir, I am prepared to face whatever disciplinary action command deems appropriate. However, I will not withdraw my formal complaint about the inappropriate conduct I have observed during this training exercise." Harrison's face darkened as he realized that Rodriguez was not simply refusing orders, but was formally challenging the entire training scenario as inappropriate and potentially illegal. Such a challenge would require investigation and documentation that could expose the questionable nature of the exercise parameters. "You are relieved of duty pending investigation," Harrison announced. "Report to the command office immediately for processing." Rodriguez nodded and began gathering his equipment. As he prepared to leave the building, he looked back at Chen one final time. She met his gaze with an expression of gratitude mixed with determination. Whatever happened next, both of them knew that the events of this day would have consequences that extended far beyond their individual careers. The training exercise that had begun as a routine multi-unit operation had become something entirely different. Now it would become a test of whether the military's stated commitment to integrity and appropriate conduct was more than empty rhetoric. Rodriguez walked out of Building 7 knowing that his military career might be over, but also knowing that he had acted according to his principles and his oath. Whatever came next, he would face it with the knowledge that he had done what he believed was right. The investigation that followed Rodriguez's formal complaint moved with surprising speed through the military justice system. Within hours of the incident, Naval Criminal Investigative Service personnel arrived at the Coronado facility to begin collecting evidence and conducting interviews with all personnel involved in the training exercise. Rodriguez found himself confined to quarters pending the investigation, but he was not surprised when NCIS agent Sarah Williams arrived at his door with questions about his allegations. Agent Williams was a 20-year veteran of military investigations who specialized in cases involving misconduct and abuse within military training environments. Petty Officer Rodriguez, I need to understand exactly what you observed during the training exercise and what led you to intervene in the manner that you did, Agent Williams began, setting up recording equipment in the small conference room where they conducted the interview. Rodriguez had spent the previous evening organizing his thoughts and reviewing the video evidence he had captured during the exercise. He was prepared to provide detailed testimony about everything he had witnessed, regardless of the personal consequences. Agent Williams, what I observed was systematic harassment and abuse disguised as training, Rodriguez began. The scenario was modified specifically to place Petty Officer Chen in a vulnerable position where she could be subjected to inappropriate treatment by personnel who had already expressed opposition to women in combat roles. Agent Williams took detailed notes as Rodriguez described the escalation of verbal abuse, the inappropriate physical contact, and the clear violation of established protocols for resistance training exercises. His testimony was precise and professional, focusing on specific behaviors rather than general impressions. Do you have any evidence to support these allegations? Agent Williams asked. Rodriguez produced his recording equipment and provided the video and audio documentation he had captured during the exercise. The evidence clearly showed Morrison and his team engaging in behavior that went far beyond any reasonable interpretation of training scenarios. Agent Williams reviewed the recordings with obvious concern. The evidence was damning, showing not just inappropriate behavior during the exercise, but also clear violations of military regulations regarding professional conduct and appropriate treatment of personnel during training operations. This evidence will be crucial to our investigation, Agent Williams stated. However, I need to inform you that your decision to intervene and refuse orders will also be subject to review. Your actions may be justified by the circumstances, but they still constitute a breach of military discipline that must be addressed. Rodriguez nodded, understanding that he would face consequences for his actions regardless of whether his allegations were substantiated. I understand, Agent Williams. I'm prepared to accept responsibility for my decisions and face whatever disciplinary action is deemed appropriate. Meanwhile, Chen was also being interviewed by investigators about her experience during the training exercise. She provided detailed testimony about the escalation of inappropriate behavior and confirmed Rodriguez's account of the events leading up to his intervention. Chen's interview was particularly important because she was the primary victim of the alleged misconduct. Her testimony would be crucial in determining whether the behavior constituted harassment and abuse or fell within acceptable parameters for resistance training exercises. Petty Officer Chen, at any point during the exercise, did you feel that the treatment you were receiving exceeded appropriate training parameters? The investigating officer asked. Chen considered her response carefully, understanding that her answer could have significant implications for everyone involved. The verbal abuse became personal and gender-specific in ways that had nothing to do with legitimate interrogation training. The physical contact was inappropriate and clearly intended to intimidate rather than test my resistance to questioning. The investigation expanded as NCIS agents interviewed other personnel who had participated in or observed the training exercise. Many confirmed that the scenario parameters had been modified specifically for Chen's participation and that the behavior of the interrogation team had exceeded anything they had seen in previous resistance training exercises. Chief Thompson provided testimony that was particularly damaging to Lieutenant Commander Harrison's position. Thompson confirmed that he had received orders to implement stress testing that was not part of the original exercise parameters and that he had expressed concerns about the appropriateness of the modifications. I was told that command wanted to evaluate how female personnel handle interrogation pressure, Thompson testified. When I asked for specific safety protocols, I was told to use my judgment about acceptable training parameters. That guidance was far too vague for the type of scenario they were requesting. Morrison and his team initially attempted to defend their actions as legitimate training techniques authorized by command. However, their defense crumbled when investigators reviewed the video evidence showing the clearly inappropriate nature of their behavior. Morrison's testimony revealed the underlying attitudes that had motivated the abusive treatment of Chen during the exercise. His comments during the investigation showed clear bias against women in military service and specific animosity toward Chen's participation in SEAL training exercises. "She had no business being in that scenario in the first place," Morrison stated during his interview. "Women don't belong in combat roles, and this exercise proved that they can't handle the pressure when things get real." Agent Williams pressed Morrison about the specific techniques he had used during the interrogation scenario. "Were the verbal statements you made and the physical contact you initiated part of established resistance training protocols?" Morrison struggled to justify his actions within the framework of legitimate training procedures. "We were told to apply realistic pressure to test her psychological resilience. Real enemies wouldn't be polite or respectful." The investigation revealed that Lieutenant Commander Harrison had indeed modified the exercise parameters specifically to create a scenario designed to test Chen's limits beyond standard training requirements. His motivation appeared to be proving that women could not handle the psychological pressure of combat-adjacent situations. Harrison's defense relied on his authority to modify training exercises and his assertion that the scenario remained within acceptable parameters for resistance training. However, his position became untenable when investigators found communications showing that he had coordinated with Morrison and others to design a scenario specifically intended to break Chen's composure. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that Rodriguez's intervention had prevented the situation from escalating even further. Evidence suggested that Morrison's team had planned additional pressure techniques that would have constituted clear assault if they had been implemented. The case drew attention from higher levels of Navy command as the implications of the investigation became apparent. The incident raised fundamental questions about training protocols, gender integration policies, and the institutional culture surrounding women in combat roles. Admiral Patricia Hayes, the commanding officer responsible for training operations on the West Coast, personally reviewed the investigation findings and determined that the case warranted court-martial proceedings for the personnel involved in the misconduct. "This case represents a clear violation of Navy values and standards," Admiral Hayes announced in a statement to the press. "We cannot and will not tolerate harassment or abuse of any personnel under the guise of training exercises." The court-martial proceedings began 6 weeks after the original incident. Morrison faced charges of conduct unbecoming a service member, assault, and violation of training protocols. Harrison was charged with abuse of authority, failure to maintain proper training standards, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. Rodriguez faced a more complex legal situation. While his intervention was justified by the circumstances, he had still technically disobeyed direct orders and interfered with authorized training operations. The question for the court-martial panel was whether his actions were legally justified under the circumstances. Chen testified as the primary witness in the proceedings against Morrison and Harrison. Her testimony was powerful and detailed, describing not just what had happened during the exercise, but also the broader pattern of hostility and resistance she had faced because of her gender and her participation in SEAL training operations. "The treatment I received was not about testing my military capabilities," Chen testified. "It was about punishing me for challenging assumptions about women in military service." Petty Officer Rodriguez's intervention prevented the situation from escalating into something that would have been clearly criminal. Rodriguez's testimony focused on his observations during the exercise and his decision-making process when he chose to intervene. He explained his understanding of military regulations regarding appropriate conduct during training exercises and his belief that his oath required him to protect fellow service members from abuse. "I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution and to bear true faith and allegiance to the United States Navy," Rodriguez testified. "Part of that oath includes protecting those who cannot protect themselves and upholding the values and standards that define our service." The prosecution in Rodriguez's case argued that military discipline required following orders even in difficult circumstances and that his intervention had undermined command authority and training objectives. They contended that proper channels existed for addressing concerns about training procedures and that his actions constituted insubordination regardless of his motivations. The defense argued that Rodriguez's actions were legally justified under military regulations that require personnel to refuse unlawful orders and to report misconduct when they observe it. They presented expert testimony about appropriate training protocols and demonstrated that the exercise had clearly exceeded acceptable parameters. The court-martial panel deliberated for 2 days before reaching their verdicts. Morrison was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to reduction in rank, forfeiture of pay, and dismissal from military service. His conviction included a recommendation that he be prohibited from any future government employment. Harrison was found guilty of abuse of authority and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. He received a reduction in rank, significant forfeiture of pay, and a formal reprimand that would effectively end his military career. The panel found that his modification of the training exercise constituted a clear violation of his responsibilities as a commanding officer. Rodriguez's case resulted in a split verdict. The panel found that while he had technically violated orders by interfering with the training exercise, his actions were justified under the circumstances and consistent with his obligations to uphold military standards and protect fellow service members. Rodriguez received a formal letter of reprimand for his breach of protocol, but the panel also issued a commendation recognizing his courage in standing up for military values under difficult circumstances. The mixed verdict reflected the complex nature of his situation and the panel's recognition that sometimes doing the right thing requires challenging authority. Chen received a formal commendation for her professionalism and courage during the incident and throughout the investigation and court-martial proceedings. Her exemplary conduct under extreme pressure demonstrated the highest standards of military service and challenged assumptions about women's capabilities in high-stress situations. The broader implications of the case extended far beyond the individual personnel involved. The Navy implemented new policies regarding training exercise protocols, mandatory training on appropriate conduct during military exercises, and stronger oversight procedures to prevent similar incidents. Admiral Hayes used the case as an opportunity to address institutional attitudes about gender integration and the importance of maintaining professional standards regardless of personal opinions about policy changes. Her leadership helped establish new cultural expectations that supported equal treatment and opportunity for all military personnel. Rodriguez continued his military career with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of the importance of individual courage in upholding institutional values. His actions during the training exercise became a case study in military ethics and the sometimes difficult balance between following orders and doing what is right. Chen completed her military service with distinction and went on to pursue a career in military law, specializing in cases involving misconduct and discrimination within military organizations. Her experience during the training exercise and subsequent legal proceedings provided her with unique insights into the challenges facing women in military service. The case ultimately demonstrated that military justice, while sometimes slow and complex, could function effectively when individuals had the courage to stand up for what was right. Rodriguez's willingness to risk his career to protect a fellow service member showed that the values of honor, courage, and commitment were more than just words when they were embodied by people willing to act on their principles. Years later, Rodriguez reflected on the events that had changed his understanding of leadership and moral courage. "Sometimes the hardest thing about serving your country is standing up to people who wear the same uniform," he observed. "But that's exactly when it matters most."